the back. All right, good job. Okay, it is a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. Well, gals, I guess is probably a more accurate term. I want to thank the retreat committee for selecting me. I'm a bit of a unorthodox selection for a retreat speaker, so I appreciate the bravery in picking somebody that might not be the most normative pick for speaking to a group of church women. As most of you know, the theme for the retreat is in relationship to. That's broad, and we had to make it intentionally so, because as we were selecting topics, there was a pretty specific ask by a large contingent of women in the presbytery, and they came forward and said they specifically wanted to cover the topic of sexual integrity. So we will start with a slow start. We'll talk about relationship to the self. We'll move to relationship towards others, and then we will end with what might be the fuzziest of the three topics. So the hope is that this will be an answer to a felt need and a topic not frequently covered, and even less so towards women. So the hope is that this is the beginning of dialogues that will then be unfolding throughout our respective churches and within the broader presbytery, or at least that is certainly my hope, that this is the beginning, not the end of a discussion that I think is long overdue. And so kudos to the women for being honest about asking for that. That said, let's kind of set the agenda and some expectations. Each of these topics is massive: relationship to self, relationship to other, relationship to sex and sexual integrity. Each one of those issues, there are volumes of scholars and theologians, and there's research, and there is so much. So I want to let you know how I will manage each speech. We'll have roughly the same format. Here is how I'm intending to proceed. So everybody kind of has a roadmap. We know what to expect. This hopefully can create a little bit of comfort and help folks follow along and get the most out of the content that we're going to cover. So I'm going to start tonight by giving just some broad context for the kind of work I do as a Christian, as a therapist, and how those things sort of collide, and sort of the foundational premises that all my work flow out of. I'm not going to give a sermon. I'm going to assume that all y'all sit in churches and all y'all know how to use your scripture. So I'm going, rather than preaching, I'm going to say, look, these are the broad structures that I function under. Now, given those broad structures, let's talk about what does this look at the level of practicality in these individual domains? And then I'll try and set that same framework for each of the speeches as we move forward. I leave it to you guys to judge how effectively I do that, but that gives us sort of an understanding of what we're going to be doing. So as a therapist who is a Christian, I start with some particular prior allegiances. I have particular things that I bring into any room, whether it's a clinical room or whether I'm consulting with a session, whether I'm doing clinical work or I'm doing coaching. I have these same broad prior allegiances, and I'm guessing as I enumerate them, y'all are gonna discover that they're very much the same ones that you yourselves hold. So any room I walk in believing certain things about what it means to be a human person, right? And at the most basic level, I believe this about any person sitting in front of me, and I believe this is relevant to any topic that we would cover, to include these three. So first, in the beginning, man made men and women, and we were made in the image of God. I think that's a really, really important thing for us to think about. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that if we do certain performative acts, that we can earn our way into kind of looking like God. I think this is a statement of ontology. Ontology is the study of what a thing actually is, like at the level of isness. Like, how do we know that a Segway isn't a car? Like, they both have wheels, they both transit things. How do we know that one is, right? And there is this, right, at the level of isness, they both can transport you and both of them can get you to Indy. They are not the same. At the ontological level, they are different things, and they are geared to accomplish different things. The human person is designed and is, by their nature, imperfectly, yet still remains a reflection of the divine. I walk into every room assuming that about the person sitting in front of me, and I assume that about each of you. But we're not just image bearers of a good God. We're terrible. We're fallen, we're broken, we're sinful, we're hateful, we're destructive, we're self-destructive. So the second insight I bring into any room is we are all unimaginably broken. We are so broken, we cannot help ourselves, right? And then the third insight isn't universally true, but I would assume that for many in this room it's true, and that is for those that are believers, we are redeemed, even in our brokenness, right? And so this means that we are now in the midst of this process of messy, non-linear, progressive sanctification. We are in this process of winding our way towards more fully imaging the God that we were designed to reflect. And these are insights that I bring into any room, into any discussion. I don't always get to speak those. I have clients that are believers and not. I get people that are open to faith and not. So I don't always get to discuss that, but I always pull that in. And I think it's fair, just like with them, I would claim my bias to say, these are the things, as we set the stage for this dialogue, these are things that I just want you to assume are progressively being applied to the content that we're discussing. I'm not going to be quoting a lot from scripture. Psychology is less interested in the big picture why and meaning and more interested in the incremental growth and change within any given person. So my day-to-day emphasis isn't on the big picture why, it's on the slow incremental change within an individual or a family system or a couple over time. So I'm not going to pretend to be a theologian. What I'm going to do is say, I want us to all pull these truths in, and through that lens, let's look at some deeply, deeply practical things. In case anybody wants to know my sources for those primitives that I laid out, I would encourage you to look at Isaiah 40:10. I see I have refined you. Psalm 66:10 through 12, for God tests us. James 10:1, 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. 1 Peter 1:6 through 7. In all this you greatly rejoice. Okay? Romans 5:3 through 5. Hebrews 12:10 through 11. Philippians 1 through 6. 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 17. Now, I think when we look at these as a corpus, we find great substantiation for all of the things that I've set forth. We are image bearers, we are broken, and we are in this cumbersome, chunky, painful, wildly disconcerting process of sanctification. And it is based upon that all my work rests. But often, that high-minded idea isn't the problem that needs solved when the rubber meets the road. And I assume that y'all's lives are substantially similar to the lives of the women I work with, and the men I work with, and the families I work with, and the children I work with. So based on that, I want us to kind of lay aside those high-minded ideals. And I'm going to ask you guys, when I talk about the idea of relationship to self, what are things that you guys naturally think about? Like, what comes up? I'm literally asking. What comes up for you guys? How do I talk to myself? Okay, that's part of my relationship to myself. What else do you think about when you think of the idea of your relationship to yourself?
Do you trust yourself? Trust your instincts?
Do I trust myself? Do I find myself to be the kind of person that can I rely on myself? Okay. Any other thoughts of how you care for yourself? Awesome. So what do you mean when you say how you care for yourself? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, there's a different dimensions, like when you think of self-care, you're thinking about the physical body, spiritual body, spiritually, emotionally, just in all aspects.
Okay.
How do you stay regulated, when you're dysregulated? How do you deal when crisis comes? I don't know.
No, I think that's great. I think that's a great answer. Anything else come to mind? No, go ahead. Okay, so part of my relationship to myself is how do I process, think about, move through, and comprehend the way others might think of me or the way others respond to me. Yeah, that's definitely part of how we relate to ourselves. What were you going to say?
I was going to say weighing my motivations constantly.
Weighing your motivations constantly. Can you say a little more about that?
Just like, is the reason that I'm choosing to do this or to like serve this person, is this like self-serving? Is this actually like a godly motivation that I have? Is it out of fear? Is it, I don't know. I spend so much of my life weighing my motivations.
So self-evaluation, like, why do I do the things I do? Am I doing them for the right reasons? Am I doing the right thing for the wrong reason, the wrong thing for the right reason, right? And there can be a whole lot of like spinning around, right? What other things? Anything else? I think we've covered a lot of the bases. Anything else anybody's dying to share? So all of those things are things I deal with on a did you raise your hand and I missed you? No, that was the baby. Okay, my bad. My bad. No, I just saw the movement and wasn't sure. Okay, so when I thought about all of the different places I might start, all of the different things I might speak to, I'm not going to lie, I wrote this really extensive, high-minded speech about all of these ideas about morality and motivation and self-concept, and it was awesome, and I'm not going to give that speech tonight at all, because as I thought about what my practice really encompasses, I thought about the things that really day in, day out are constant concerns. It was actually so much more basic than this. So when we talk about our relationships to ourselves, here is what I want to posit. I want to posit that all of those things we threw out, our social world and how that impacts our self-talk, how we do or do not weigh and measure the morality of how we think and how we act, the ways we maintain stasis. I want to posit that all of these hinge on some basic things that we are really, really bad at doing consistently, right? I know. So the good news is we all are terrible at these things together. Jump in, the water's warm. We all women, I've never met a woman that I go through the list of these 3 concerns and they're like, I got them all on lockdown. So the first question I want to ask you regarding your relationship to yourself is, how's your sleep? No, I know it seems super low tech, but like, how's your sleep? Do you get enough sleep? And it's not just do you get enough sleep, it's do you get good sleep? Do you set the rhythms of your life so that you can get good sleep? Now I know this seems like it's not really high-minded enough for a spiritual women's retreat, but when we look at our bodies and our minds as resources to be stewarded, this is precisely the kind of gut check we all need as we come to a women's retreat to get away from and step away from the daily grind. How is your sleep? How is your sleep hygiene? Does everybody know what sleep hygiene is? Okay, I did not know. I didn't know. I wasn't trying to pounce. Okay, so
I usually don't. And so that's where like
you're like, I'm just gonna awkwardly sip my coffee while I do not acknowledge this. Okay, so sleep hygiene, just to recap and reprise, even if everybody is in the know, is the series of behaviors we do surrounding the rhythms of our life to set ourselves up for a consistent, reliable, restful interval of sleep. And when we look at sleep as an act of stewardship, I'm just going to read, and this isn't all, these are just like, and these are headings. I'm not going to read you the whole studies because y'all would fall asleep. Adequate sleep boosts your immune system. Insufficient sleep weakens your physical immunity. And this was, I've got multiple studies up here if you want me to send those to you. Type 2 diabetes increases with poor sleep. Your risk of obesity increases with poor sleep. Your hormone and metabolic rates are less stable over time with poor sleep. Insufficient sleep diminishes athletic performance. Poor sleep increases negative emotions and decreases ability to self-regulate your own emotions. Insufficient sleep exacerbates depression and can be a risk factor for developing depression. I think we should lock the doors because sounding a little extra. Yeah, it's sounding a little extra out there. Deprivation of sleep amplifies your reactivity, so it actually makes you more reactive. It makes you less emotionally stable. And these things aren't a one and done. When we look at sleep, one night of poor or insufficient sleep can have a blast radius of 6 or 7 days. We have this idea that like we can crash and burn on the weekends, or we can have these other things, but actually what we find is that when we do that, it doesn't recuperate the same way as an even set sufficient quantity of sleep. So the myth of like crashing out and sleeping in on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that level sets your sleep debt, the data doesn't bear that out. What we actually find is that data persists, and not only does it persist, it aggregates. Some studies indicate that sleep deprivation on the order of nursing mothers makes you as delayed in your reactions as a drunk driver. But think about this, we as women, we as caretakers of our children, we as caretakers in our communities and our families, we will often choose between other goods and the continuity and consistency of routine and sufficient sleep. And we tell ourselves we're being selfless. We tell ourselves it's because I love my children. We tell ourselves it's because I love my family. We tell ourselves that it's because I deserve to have fun. I deserve to have time to myself. We tell ourselves a lot of things, but what we don't tell ourselves is, I'm gonna do this and then tomorrow I'm gonna function like a drunk person. I think that that's a stewardship level issue. So when we're being heroic, and there are absolutely times when we have no choice, right? We've got vomiting kids, we've got water leaks in the basement. There are fires we must necessarily put out. But I think often we tell ourselves that this is a victimless crime, as it were. We tell ourselves that the fallout to this isn't really that big. We tell ourselves that it doesn't create that big of an impact, but when we look at the data, here's what we find. You are less stable. You are less stable in your relationships. You are less healthy. You are more disease prone. All of the things that we were talking about that came up for y'all, your socially moderated things, your questioning and your self-evaluation, your self-evaluation will necessarily be more fraught, less stable, more anxious, less even if you are doing that, having not just done the basic act of getting yourself to bed on time, right? And I'm not finger wagging, I'm a single mom. There are a lot of times where this is an area that I struggle, but I will say the job I have demands a certain amount of presence, so I've become really, really, really disciplined. I put the kids to bed, and then I put myself to bed, right? Once I wind them down and I've got relative peace, I'm pretty disciplined about this. So I'm not saying I'm a paragon of this. What I'm saying is, what I have discovered is if I want to be present in my work, I need a full night's rest. So I know that sounds like deeply, deeply practical, but I want to ask you guys, how many want to raise their hand and say, like, I think I take good care of myself. I think I get enough sleep. I think I do okay here. I mean, like, as we're looking around, there are only a handful of ladies, and then there are a lot of y'all that are like, I'm probably not the most egregious, I'm probably not the worst, but like, we are more accident prone, we are more relationally volatile, we are less physically capable when we don't manage our rhythms of sleep and wakefulness. So inside your packets, I am not gonna do a line by line, I have a survey. And I want you, long after you're gone here, to look at that survey. And it's designed to help you ask constructive and thoughtful questions surrounding your sleep and wakefulness. How can I be a good steward of my body by tending to the rhythms of sleep and wakefulness? How can I create a room that's conducive to relaxing in this generation? How can I stop doom scrolling long enough to let my brain down regulate so that my body is ready for sleep? Newsflash, if you don't put your phone to bed outside your bedroom, you are setting yourself up to fail. Get yourself an old school analog clock, sisters, and put your phone to bed 45 minutes to an hour before you're trying to ask your brain to shut off. So there are all kinds of different things I would encourage you guys to go through and ask yourself, is this an area where I can make consistent small changes and be a much better steward? And through that stewardship, I can have a better relationship with myself. By basic self-care, I can be better in how I regulate my emotions, how I communicate with others, how I manage my own physical health through the simple act of getting sufficient sleep. The next is equally as basic. Let's talk about our body as an organism that needs to move. I am not talking about athleticism. If you were in CrossFit, you don't get extra gold stars. What I am talking about is the act of moving your body and getting your circulatory system moving sufficient to assist in basic health maintenance. This isn't about athleticism in the slightest. But when we look at the basic stewardship of moving your body, again, the science is astoundingly clear. Aerobic exercise in that session, immediately during and after 30 minutes of rigorous exercise of any variety, people have more capacity to regulate their own emotions, and they on average have less negative sentiment of any variety. Literally, when you move your meat, your emotions balance better. As the blood flows, oxygen gets to all those extremities, and your organism is better for having moved. But it's not just that in the immediate aftermath, movement does that. 30 minutes of rigorous exercise that helps your brain turn over new cells. Tammy told me that one. Way to go, Tammy. I know, because we were biking, and I was like, do you want to go longer? And she's like, no, it'll be 30 minutes. I've gotten my neurons. And I was like, cool, I'm here for it. Like, you know what you need to do to get it done, and that's what's important, right? But it's not just that it helps our brain and it helps us manage our emotions. It can reduce cortisol, which is positively correlated with obesity. Like, higher cortisol levels means higher fat retention. It helps with memory retention and cognitive processing. Well, that's a really fancy way of saying it helps you remember things, and it helps your brain do the hard work of high-level processing, impacting things over time, and complex reasoning functions are increased with regular exercise. They expand neuroplasticity. Everybody know what neuroplasticity is? That's the capacity for your brain to rewire and adapt to novel circumstance, novel demand. So physical exercise is positively correlated with better neuroplasticity, right? Neurogenesis, which is the regeneration of brain cells. Anxiety and depression, not just episodic to the exercise, consistent exercise down-regulates anxiety and depression. If done consistently, it downtrends not just near the episode, but over the long haul, you trend downward. So it is a hedge against depression and anxiety on the order of being more effective than the average in-market antidepressant. That's to say 30 minutes of rigorous exercise between 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week, is more effective than the pill you would go to your doctor and get for the exact same condition. Now, that's not trying to say that pills aren't great for some and that there's no place for that. What I'm saying is not all neurochemistry works for any one individual. Some pills work some better for some than others. But when we look at a global market, anything that has made it to market works about 30% of the time. And exercise is more effective than that margin. So it's still more effective more often than any drug that's made it to market. I don't think we really think about that. When we say like it's good for depression, I don't think that we realize that it's more effective than any other solution in the medicinal market, which I think is pretty impressive, right? I think this is interesting. There's some good research to indicate that physical exercise increases your social capacity. People who exercise regularly are more socially connected. That wasn't a connection I was looking for, but there are some really, really good reasons, right? So there's an adversity to the consistency of exercise. There's a lot of adversity to overcome, especially anybody that's walked outside in Indiana in the wintertime, right? Like, it's not always great to be outside moving your body, right? That touching grass becomes costly when it's 20 degrees out. But what we find is the ability to overcome diversity in that discipline actually translates to resiliency in the social context. So when we're talking about those socially moderated relationships, it's not intuitive to be like, hey, want to connect better to people you care about? Go for a walk. It doesn't seem like that's going to correlate, but when we look at the human body and we study like vast swaths of people, here's what we find. You move your body, you connect more, you connect better. And it kind of makes intuitive sense when you look at the anxiety and depression things, which are major inhibitors for like getting up, getting out, being in the world, feeling connected, feeling like you want to connect, feeling like you're worthy of connection. So all of those things, right, like it's almost like there's this system that designed it all, and they all kind of like, mutually reinforce each other, right? I just think and this is why I do what I do, and this is why I care about it, because there's a symmetry where we see that what happens to the body impacts the mind, and what happens to the mind impacts the body, and there's this interplay, as if those systems were just inextricably connected, and we as members of the broader human and social system, there is that other degree of connectedness. It's like if you want to be available and have the margin to connect deeply and well, you need to take care of yourself. And in taking care of yourself, you get the resources to connect deeply and well. And that reciprocal shaping is a big part of the work I do, and it's why I love the work I do. So, big fan of exercise, and here is what I will say. I didn't have an exercise checklist. I did the sleep hygiene checklist because I think that's less pervasive. But when we're looking at the self-care of moving your body, here's what I want to say. There is no wrong way to get this accomplished. If you have children, it is okay to go down in your basement with your earbuds in and drop it like it's hot, all by yourself, as a way to get your body in motion. There is no wrong way. Find a way to be in motion that is consistent, that you don't hate, that is realistic for the life you have. And then just get serious about doing that thing enough to make sure that you are in motion in the ways your body at a fundamental level needs, right? No wrong way to eat the Reese's. You want to swim at the Y, great. You need low impact. Find a way to be in motion, okay? Lastly, you thought the first two were basic. This one's by far the most basic. How often do you take a deep breath? I don't mean a proverbial breath. I literally mean how often do you breathe physically, deeply, and well. Clients that come to me with anxiety, I've had great success in my anxiety practice. It takes 35 sessions to get them to try the exercises because they seem so low-tech and dumb that they don't want to do them. And then once they start doing them, they go off my service in 3 weeks. And here is why. It is crazy how important deep breathing is to so much mental health. Literally the act, and there's great science behind this. Does anybody know the science behind this? Because I can geek out all day long on this. I'm not gonna geek out on it. But here is what you need to know. there is something called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve spans all your vital stuffs. And what your body and my body know at a fundamental level is when you are safe, you have the luxury of taking big, deep breaths. When you are under distress, when you are in physical danger, what happens? Rapid heart rate. Okay, this is distress. The antithesis of distress is and when you do this, those nerves are stimulated. You literally have told your body, sister, you're safe. Your body's fine. There's nobody coming to get you. Everything's gonna be okay. You're intact, body and soul. And this is by far the hardest thing to get people to get good at, and is by far the biggest bang for the buck in the work I do. How many times a day do you take a good, fat, deep breath and let your body know, no matter what your kids did to your kitchen, no matter what your kids did in school, no matter what part on your car broke down, no matter what part of your basement flooded this year, no matter what those things are going on around you, as a person, as a being, you are intact, you are whole, you are safe. How often do we do this basic thing? It's a tremendous gift we can give ourselves, and it's one that most of us get to an age where we feel like it's a primary school trick. And we sort of one day wake up and feel like we're too old to sit down and force ourselves to spend 5 minutes deep breathing. But when we do this, the science is so clear. The ways that that down regulates anxiety, decreases depression, stimulates the lymphatic system. Deep breathing is the coolest thing you can do for your body maybe ever. And it is by far one of the most neglected acts of stewarding our own physical being, because it is so low tech and we do it so often that we kind of just take it for granted. We sort of just assume that because we haven't keeled over due to lack of oxygen, we're probably doing a pretty good job. But the reality is, just because we do it a lot doesn't mean we're doing it well or effectively. So I'm gonna run through some data here that, I mean, when I read these studies, my little nerd heart goes pitter-pat in ways that, yes ma'am?
Can you send out those studies?
Yeah, I can absolutely forward you, but like this is great. Deep, slow breathing shifts the autonomic nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So like sympathetic is the brake, parasympathetic is the gas. Literally by deep breathing, you can press the brakes on your entire physiology. How cool is that? And it's correlated with anxiety reduction, better sleep, better emotional control over time. It's correlated with increases in calm, lack of reduction to triggering or heightened stimuli, not just when you're doing it. The discipline of doing it over time means that when other stimuli comes that would cause you to start that rapid, shallow breathing, instead, you start taking those big, deep breaths, and instead of up-regulating, you down-regulate in the face of adversity. It's super cool. The discipline pays dividends well beyond the moment that you might do that, right? There's more. I've got like 10 different studies. It increases cognition, benefits the brainstem, helps with focus, elimination of mind wandering and other brain regulation things well past the activity. It's highly correlated with flexibility in decision making and resiliency, reduction of impulsivity, alleviation of stress, gratitude, deep breathing and because deep breathing tends to be mindful. It's really, really hard to do all these big, deep breaths and sort of not inherently still your mind. And that stilling of the mind, like, it doesn't matter what scaffold exercise you're given by a mental health professional or you see on a YouTube clip, all mindfulness is designed to draw your focus to the here and now and to the embodied, like, what is literally happening in my skin right here, right now? What is happening in my proximal environment right here, right now? Literally all mindfulness is geared towards getting you to be able to have a singular focus onto those two things. And lo and behold, when we still our minds and we focus on, hey, what's happening? Am I okay? And what is immediately relevant, what we find is we're actually a lot more grateful than when we allow our mind to wander on all the if-thens and the what's out there and the hypotheticals, and right? When we narrow our focus to where am I, what's going on with me real time, we find we're more grateful. I think that that's a powerful thing, and I think these things really become acts of stewarding our body and stewarding our mind. I love this. Deep breathing and mindfulness is also positively correlated with healthy social relationships. It doesn't really feel like I'm repeating myself. It's because I am. It's because these basic things are all fundamental to staying intact enough, sound enough, stable enough to relate well to self and relate well to others. And when we do them, we boost our functionality. I just think it's so great that there are all these ways we can study and research and discover that when we work in line with the God-given design of the body we have and the mind we have and the connection between these two things, when we work in the grain, what we find is what you would expect to find, human flourishing, right? We find that we are better at doing life when we work in line with the design that was given to us. Yeah, I've got like 3 studies on social connection and breathing. And I didn't even, when I went looking for that, I didn't know that one was coming. I was like, people will be calmer, people, right? But like, I love the social connectedness. So I know it seems like I started with these high-minded, broad principles and then got into some real granularity. But I want to stress this. In the work I do, by far, one of the things that is the most relevant is these basic fundamentals. I have couples coming to me with distress in their marriage, and it's like, you guys get enough sleep? You guys active? Do you guys like pause and take a breath, maybe pray every once in a while? And you'd be surprised how thin these things run in couples that are distressed. You'd be surprised how thin these things run in teenagers that are struggling to regulate their own emotions. These basic things correlate with all of those other big ticket things that we want to talk about. And by the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about those things. I'm saying that when I thought about speaking, it made sense to me to start at the beginning. And this just felt like the beginning to me. So I hope that this talk becomes one of many talks about healthy relationships we can have to ourselves, where we can talk about healthy self-examination and how do I know the difference between healthy self-examination and, say, anxiety, right? How do I know the difference between being shaped healthfully when people give me constructive feedback and being so image conscious I'm filled with paralysis, right? These are all meaningful discussions to have. And I think we're all better equipped to have them if we've had a good night's sleep, we've taken a nice long walk, and we sit down, and before we come to the table, we take a big, long breath. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
So the deep breathing aspect, would you say, do you recommend to your clients 5 deep breaths at one time a day, or scattered throughout the day, or?
That's an excellent question. So actually, so I have a theory behind this. Now, by the way, I don't have a study for this. This is something that observationally, I feel like this is the most functional. So when we look at a day in the life of, and it doesn't matter whether it's a housewife or a working mom, what we know about the lived experience of anyone is that the most energy you're going to burn is when you transition, the stopping of one thing and the starting of a new thing. If you imagine that your body is a car and that you have to stop and start, you burn the most gas on the stops and on the starts. So here is what I generally recommend. Where are the points of major transition in your day? If you can identify the major transitions in your day, what I recommend, and like, I force people, because here's what happens. I'll explain to them. I'll be like, this is what it's like to do the belly breathing. And I'll explain to them, and they're like, yeah, like it seems pretty straightforward, I can do it. And then I'll come back the next time we're together, and I'll be like, did you do that? And they'll be like, oh, really? Right? And I'm like, okay, well, you should really do it. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll look it up on YouTube. And then what ends up happening is this goes on long enough that we will sit in the room, and I'm like, we're gonna do it together. So I'll show you guys. There is a good way to do it. It doesn't matter. You can sit, you can stand, get in a place where you feel relatively comfortable. Don't be like hunched over, right? So get in a place, and then put your hand on your belly button. And then I want you, and it's better if you close your eyes because you're less self-conscious. It's like the dog, you can't see me when I close my eyes. And then close your eyes and imagine that your belly is a balloon and you are trying to fill it so full that it pops. You know, like when you were a little kid? So you literally just go, until you can't stick it out anymore. And then you hold for 4. And then you blow it out like you're blowing through a straw. And you blow until you don't have any air left, until you literally like, and the reason you want to do that is because a lot of times you don't actually empty your lungs fully. You breathe so shallowly that there's kind of like, there are sacs that never get fully emptied and then refilled. So it's like stale air in there. So you do, and if you do that, it's called so you do that for a repetition of between 4 to 6 for transitional periods. This is a really, it takes about a minute. So if you, generally speaking, set a timer for a minute, you're gonna get 4 to 6 breaths in that minute, depending on how long you suck in, how long you can hold, and how slowly you can blow out, right? And so what I say is, if you're struggling to do it at all because it feels really weird and you feel kind of stupid and you're worried that people might see, it also feels super primary schoolish, link it to things you're already doing, right? So what's part of your morning spool-up routine to leave the house and what part of that's private? Oh, I know I'm gonna be brushing my teeth. I know I'm gonna be doing these things. Okay, so I'm going to, during that spool-up, I'm gonna piggyback that 1 solid minute of breathing before I start my day. And then it's like, okay, I'm gonna take an hour off the clock during my workday, or my kids are taking a nap. So I want to tell my body you can relax a little bit. So I'm gonna take that minute and I'm gonna do that so that I can switch gears to a different posture instead of just coasting on the busyness of being in a work posture or being in a parenting posture or whatever it is, whatever the busyness of the day is. And then I would say at every one of those major transitional moments, take 1 solid minute, 4 to 6 really deep breaths. And it's astounding the ways that can impact your overall functioning. Did that answer? We good?
No, I was going to say, the time I started thinking about deep breaths was when I took voice lessons, because my teacher told me to take deep breaths, and I didn't know what she's doing. Really, she had me, she's like, okay, she was like, I feel weird, but it's female, so it's fine. She had me like go like this, and like this, and when you take a proper deep breath, I guess diaphragm.
Yeah, you can feel it expand.
Like a balloon, you can feel it. So if you do that to yourself, then you know you're doing it properly. If when you take that deep breath, this is going out, but also in the back.
Yeah, you can, like, it's like a balloon. It's going in both directions. Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah.
When I felt that on her, I thought, that's what it's supposed to be like.
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to feel like. And you're right, it's like the technical term is diaphragmatic breathing. Yeah. And as you do that, you expand lung capacity, you turn over that stale oxygen, you stimulate that vagus nerve. You're doing so many really cool, super technical, high-tech things all by slowing down and giving yourself a minute to take a breath. Any other questions, not just about breathing, but about any of the other things?
Random. So before bedtime, is it okay to do, I do the box breathing, and so that's why this is kind of fun talking about this. Is it okay to do it right before bed, or would you?
Oh, I think doing it right before bed, because if you think about it, bed's a tremendous time of transition, right? You're trying to stop thinking about all the things that you did, like, while being awake. And if your day's anything like my day, that's like a lot, right? So that stillness, and what I would say is, like, if you're trying to fall asleep, I might even extend that time. And one of the things that you might find is that can help with the down regulation, such that you then just kind of fall into a natural kind of drowsy rhythm. Like, that can be a great part of the sleep hygiene process. Again, funny how all these things seem to loop together.
Just to piggyback off that, my husband and I both stayed voice in college, and thinking about what you said about breathing, my voice teacher would tell me to pretend as though you're like, you have a barrel around you and it's expanding, and then when you go to exhale, you're not allowing your barrel to collapse, and your belly button is moving up, like back in toward your spine, and that engages the abdominal muscles. But I was remembering too that my husband has done a study with, or exercise with his students where you lay on your back and you can really feel the air. So thinking about going to sleep,
It's a great time to do it.
on your back, you can feel as your back is pressing up against, the mattress or whatever. You can really feel, if you're not familiar with what that diaphragmatic breathing is like, you can feel it very much so in your ribs.
Yeah.
There. So
I mean, it's really, like, there's a whole science behind breathing. Now, I went to theater school. I did not do singing. Like, ask anybody who's seen me in a psalm sing. Like, you don't want that. But in doing that, I did take voice production and speech. And what's interesting is there's actually more to, like, the diaphragmatic breathing is super, super helpful, but, like, if you're trying to optimize, you can actually do two separate kinds. So if you place your hands on your rib cage, you can actually breathe in such a way that you expand your rib cage outward. And so, like, the ninja level of this, which none of us need to get to tonight by any stretch, is if you want to, you can start by breathing out, and if you put your hands here, you can actually force your rib cage to open. And you can actually expand lung capacity. Like, you can expand your fitness level by getting good at breathing out and expanding those ribs. And then once that's as full as it can be, then expand your balloon, and then you're just like a big giant wad of fresh air. It's pretty epic. Like, I know it sounds goofy, but it's actually, like, really super valuable for your body. And it's super, like, there's all this, like, when scientists go and study it, there's all this great innovative stuff happening. But when the rubber meets the road, you're just like some goober at your house being like, and, like, that feels like not cool or high science or, high tech at all. It feels just like I'm a dork. And honestly, I truly believe this. I believe that's one of the big reasons we don't do it, because it feels so stupid. It just feels like awkward to do it, so we just don't. But when we do, biggest bang for the mental health buck is breathing. Breathe well, breathe deeply, breathe often. Use it as a way to let yourself shift gears. Use it as a way to let go of one stressor and make space for the next round of stressors. Use it as a way to lay down the stresses of the day. And one of the things that I do, and this may or may not resonate with you, is I try and do those big, deep breaths when I say my evening prayers. To me, this is the physical echo of trying to give my concerns over to God. This is the physical embodiment as I breathe out all that heavy. And so for me, those things go hand in hand, and that's part of my nightly sleep hygiene. And I might encourage you to evaluate that. Like, if you're struggling to be consistent in your prayer life, maybe put those things together. It's like a peanut butter jelly sandwich, so you just go right together. See if that works for you. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
How do you figure out how much sleep you really need each night if you've been in a consistent pattern of not getting enough?
That is an awesome question. And the answer is everybody's body is a bit different, but you have to be disciplined about your commitment to stay in bed. I know, this sounds really, really goofy, but here's the thing. When you function at a sleep deficit, your body sort of learns to expect that and actually becomes bad at sleeping the amount that it needs. So you actually need to wall off the time, right? The average adult woman of childbearing age needs between 9 and 10 hours of sleep. Anybody pulling cool hours like that? Woo! You are the rock star. No, I'm literally, like, I'm not being hyperbolic. The average woman of childbearing age, like at the statistical level, minimum, like they say, like you are on an active debt if you're below 8 as a woman of childbearing age.
I've read some studies that men need less.
Men do need less, but men's bodies don't manufacture people. So, like, I'm just saying, like, our body's got a lot going on. What?
Are, like, just the way that our bodies function off hormones, so like our hormones to be regulated?
Yeah. No, yes. Men, ironically, need less, and on average, at the statistical analysis level, get more. But here's what's great. When we're gonna get to boundaries later on, right? But when we get to relationship with other and boundaries, one of the things that we can do is we can have a reasonable dialogue about, like, stewardship is like, I need time to rest. So if you're struggling to get sufficient and you're, let's say you've been functioning for a long time on 6, you need to start walling off. And then here's the discipline, right? So there is actually a science behind. So I went to bed at a reasonable hour instead of falling asleep with my phone at 2 a.m., right? So I go to bed at a reasonable hour and then, like, I wake up and I'm like ready to go at 3 a.m., right? So this happens when you're trying to expand your sleep hours. And actually, it's like, okay, so when you do that, don't turn on your phone, don't turn on your computer, don't turn on music, don't turn on a TV. Try and calm yourself, do some breathing. If after 20 minutes you don't fall back into sleep, get up and do boring, repetitive tasks. Read your dishwasher manual, like that kind of stuff. No, I'm serious, there's good science behind this. And what will happen is your brain will get bored enough to where you're like, maybe I should. And you will find that your body finds that sleep rhythm. So if you're struggling to get sufficient sleep because you've already adapted to deficit, go to the library, get the most boring books you can find, and get committed, like I'm not gonna do anything wildly productive. If I wake up, I get up, I go pee, I have a drink of water, or I have some more milk, or whatever, and then I lay back down. If I can't sleep, I'm gonna turn on a little itty bitty book light, and I'm gonna read about, animal grazing rights in Ethiopia until I just can't stay awake no more. And that's how you develop the rhythm. And what happens is when you stay committed to that, what you'll find is that second interval of time, when you've slept that's probably your aggregate chunk. Like that's gonna be more or less the level. But give yourself time and stick with it for a series of weeks to give your body time to switch gears and get out of deficit mode. It won't happen overnight.
It's tangential, but it's about one of my kids' sleep. So our 6-year-old has ADHD. We're not on medication right now, so it's not like she has an external stimulant, but she's had trouble going to sleep since she was like a year and a half old. So she's been getting small amounts of melatonin.
I have an ADHD son. Melatonin is my friend. The struggle is real.
Postpartum, I was tired enough, I was just going to bed without it. But what are some other, for a 6-year-old who's hyperactive, are there other tools that can be implemented in helping her develop proper sleep hygiene?
That's a great question, especially with the neurodivergence component. Your child needs an exceedingly long, exceedingly boring, exceedingly structured wind-down routine. And the more it's the same every night, the better. And here's what I mean. It's like, okay, we're gonna go brush your teeth. And then we're gonna put pajamas on. And then we're going to say bedtime prayers. And then we're going to go make our bed. And then we're going to go get into the bed. And then I'm going to tell you an exceedingly non-stimulating bedtime story. And then I'm going to stay here and I'm going to stroke your forehead for a little bit to help you calm down. And then I'm going to tell you you're not going to be left to your own devices. I'm going to come back and I'm going to check on you in 10 minutes. And then you come in 5 because they have ADHD. And then you come and you settle and you leave and you resettle until, and then what happens is when you instantiate that routine consistently enough, often enough, right, this becomes, books on tape can be great for that. Like, we're gonna listen to a bedtime story and then find that British dude that's like monotoning it, the Chronicles of Narnia, and then be like, this is what we're gonna listen to. And so you're like, you can be there for part of it, and then you can leave it running. There's no light, it's just auditory, but it's also very monotone, very even. And then it's like, I'm gonna come back, and then you, right? Like, so you need to create a sequence of force focus wind downs to kind of continue to, and also have them do the belly breathing. That's super useful, right? And the only other thing that I can tell you is giving them meaningful choice can be really, really helpful. So at every interval, if you can give them a choice, then they feel like they're not being told what to do. And so they're just more cooperative. So it's like, do you want the red or the blue PJs, right? Do you want, right, like, do you want to read the book first or do you want to sing this? Like, give them meaningful choice so that they're just mentally more participatory in the execution of the wind down, and so they're more bought into it, and it means that it's more effective in getting their brain to grapple with what comes next. Does that make sense? Like, they have to have a certain amount of buy-in, and the more buy-in they have, the more effective it is at sort of down-regulating their system to get them to be ready for sleep.
So is the elongation of the routine for the purpose of just slowing them down?
Yeah, because like, oh my word, I got a son with ADHD. I'll stick him to bed. I go in, I brush my teeth, I clean my face, I change my pajamas, and I come out, and my son's like, so I was thinking about knives, and the one I bought, and I'm just like, what? Go to bed. But the thing is, he was laying in bed. He was trying to be a good boy, and it's just like, right? Okay, so if you can help them still, then what you do is you make it, I honestly think a lot of my son with ADHD nighttime routine, I don't think he's trying to be belligerent. I think legitimately it's super hard for him to still his thinking and for him to still his body. Now, different parents have different levels of comfort with this, so I'm gonna throw this out. This is not something I would recommend in clinical work, but this is something that I, as a mom, do. My son, if I can get him physically still, I can get him to sleep. And so I will hold my 9-year-old boy like he is a little child. I will wrap my arms around him, and I will physically, not in a creepy way, guys, right? No, but what I'm saying is if you can cuddle with your kid to get them to be not you know what I mean? Like with ADHD kids, it's like, if you can get them still enough, then the mind's just like, well, I don't know how to keep running without the movement, and it just kind of shuts. At least with my kid. That might be different per kid. So I think that's pretty often the case in a lot of ADHD, or just a lot of real kinesthetic kids. So what I would say is if you can get him physically pinned in a loving and gentle and comforting way, you increase your odds of success exponentially. Is that helpful at all?
That checks out.
Sure. Cool.
Plan to do that over time to make it easier for them to establish those routines for themselves?
So obviously the goal is to move towards more and more and more autonomy. But every kid's gonna be different. So there's no set, in my estimation, and in my clinical experience, man, I knew this one mom whose son at 4 would go get his blankie, get his lovey, and be like, it's bedtime, and walk up the stairs and just put himself to sleep. And I was like, That is freaky, but like in the best possible. Like, I want what you've got, lady, right? You know, every kid is every kid, right? Like your kid's gonna be your kid. So the goal is to create a routine that's predictable enough that like you start asking them, well, what comes next? What comes next? And then it's like, okay, well, if you know what comes next, then do that, right? Like, so you start by hot walking them through it, then you start by prompting them. And the goal is when and where you can. Some steps may be harder than others for different kids. But the goal is to get them to a place where they can settle themselves. But in the interim, trust me, because you value your sleep. So getting your kid to bed is like that scene from Jerry Maguire. Help me, help you, help me, help you. And this is the negotiation every night at bedtime. Help me so I can help you, and then so I can get to bed.
So how long should this whole, if you have a person like that, how long should you plan for that to take?
Okay, so should is an interesting term, right? So so there, like on a good night, I can wind down my son 35, 45 minutes in a good night. In the middle of winter break, 2 hours, 2:15 if I'm lucky. You know, like the more other confounding variables, are we traveling? Are we in a novel location? So the reality is set some good expectations, but what that also means is start your wind down way ridiculously sooner. I know people that are like, well, we start sending our kids to bed, and it's like, okay, so when do you want them asleep? So let's back work that rather than just like crossing our fingers and hoping that we're gonna get the 45 minutes. It's like if you want them down by 9, wind down starts at 7.
That means get up at 7, right, or 8, not sleep in the morning.
Well, yeah, I mean, in particular, if you're homeschoolers, yeah, do not do, like, you know, if, in particular with like the ADHD and divergence where you're gonna have difficulty with the wind down anyway, yeah, you want them good and tired by the end of the day, right? But again, that goes back to like all these disciplines inform each other, especially with your divergent kids. Make them get outside and move their bodies. I want you tired, boy. I love you, but I need you to go to bed. And the way I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna get you up, I'm gonna get you active, and then I'm gonna give you a good long, it's like, you know, those big long trains, you know, how they have to, like, it takes them forever to spool up in the like when they're getting going, but then if they're trying to stop at a station, they have to start braking miles out, those big trains. Yeah, you wanna give all the lead time you can for that train to finally come to a complete full stop. That make sense? I gotta say, some of those things are like not super exciting because sometimes that means that you have to cut your evening short. Like you're having fun, and you know, if it were just you, I could be social or I could do whatever, I could watch, I could whatever, and then I could hit the pillow and be asleep in 30 seconds. And so you're thinking you can push back and you can push back, but the thing is, if you value your sleep, you have to prioritize their sleep hygiene and that routine. The discipline of sleep and the discipline of rest, right? Like it all flows together in the family unit. Yeah.
I have a suggestion for people who might struggle with sleep to look at magnesium as a solution. Yeah. I used to wake up in the night because I nursed a baby, and then I would be able to go back to sleep.
Yeah, and sometimes you can have those jerks due to insufficient potassium that wake you up at night. Yeah, like there's some interesting stuff. And I would say this, please nobody consider any of what I've given as specific counsel. I'm giving broad sweeping stuff. If you feel like there's something going wrong, you should seek a physical health or a mental health professional to, like I'm not trying to solve all your problems here, I'm trying to give a snapshot so you can ask some questions like, where can I make changes? How can I make those changes constructively? And what are the good reasons to make those changes?
It's time, but so I was gonna tell everyone that we have a time for question and answers. It will be about an hour tomorrow. So if you have any more questions, we're
3x5 cards as you would like, and there's a bin out there on the registration table where you can get the 3x5 cards, but also place them. So any other questions that you have,
Sure.
you can still ask her. There's still time.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. Okay, well, with that, thank you guys so much for your time and attention.